Now this brings us to the most intricate part of this board. The chessboard itself wasn't too bad, but now we're going to be cutting miters, which can be tricky. First, make sure you have a very sharp pencil. One of the wood ones that are sharpened down, one of the mechanical that have a very small piece of lead. Then we're going to take your pieces and we're going to lay everything on top of one of these whiteboards. This is the same type of board that we glued on top of when we did this board. Grab the bigger one. The reason I do this is because my table is not known for being perfectly flat. It's not bad, but I'd rather it be right on flat, and these are. So I always lay this down to help as I'm lining things up. So we want your decorative edges to be against the board. And you notice I haven't even bothered, cutting off this extra wood. We're going to be mitering it off anyway, so I just didn't bother. Is this my best face? Nope, I like this one a little bit better. I see a knot. This one has fewer knots, so I like that one. I see a big knot here, none there. So I'm going to go that way on this. And this one, ooh, quite a few knots. So I want it just the way it is. Now here's what I like to do to make sure we're cutting the right direction. From here, if I line this up, we're going to cut from this corner out at 45 degrees. So I put an angle line here and there. They're both going to be cut out. Now I know they're not accurate, but that gives me the direction that I need to stay. I can't tell you how many times students have come without thinking they just cut the wrong direction and all of a sudden everything is messed up. So this is important. Cut in and that way. Set that on top, that way, and same thing on this. You're just marking direction. We haven't actually measured anything yet. Now we're going to go to the table saw and cut these miters. Now some of you may know, if you've done something like this before, I could use a chop saw, miter saw. It's called a miter saw for a reason. It's for doing this. In my opinion, miter saws work great. That's fine. You can use them, but I like the table saw jig that I've made a little bit better. And I'll explain as we get to the next step. This jig is one that I made specifically for cutting these pieces. This jig will work on either table saw. It's fine. Notice that I had to lift the guard out of the way and raise the blade quite a bit because this raises the board up enough. I need to make sure that it's going to cut through. So raise the blade with it off, of course, to make sure I'm going to make a clean cut each time. All right, now direction. I have the marks, and this is where a lot of students, they get a little mixed up. That's why we put direction on here. It's not like this. My mark is going this way. That's totally wrong. I need to cut in that direction. So I need to flip my board around, decorative edge in towards this, and make my cut. Now all I'm doing here is making a cut that makes it sharp from this upper corner downward. No measurement, but I'm making it as big as I can. All right, and when I cut the other one, I can't flip it around and do it that way. That won't work, that's the wrong way. I need to flip it over to cut the other side. But again, don't do that yet. All I'm gonna do in this first cut is cut one end of all four of these pieces, the same end. Safety glasses on, because remember, there's no guard in this case, but I can keep my hands well out of the way, out of line. So I'm lining this corner up with the center of that blade. And then bring it back. Lay that aside, and grab the next one. Now remember, if I pull it back, it does tend to dip. That's fine. Lines in, and I can line up my front edge right there, and then hold it in. Carefully, so I never want to drop anything on that blade, so be very gentle. There we go. So I didn't quite go enough, so I'm going to go a little further. There we go. Nice and sharp on the edge there. Now we take all your pieces back to the board and we'll mark where to cut the other end. Now it's time for a lot of back and forth. We're going to be here to get it lined up and marked. We're going to go back to the table saw to cut, bring it back, see if it works, and do that on each piece. So let's line this back up with how I had it. There we go. So we've cut one end on all of them. So I don't care which side you start from. Let's just start from this one closest to me. And what I need is another miter to help line this up. So I take this board, flip it over so I can have the miter. Now I know it's upside down because I wanted this side up. Don't worry about that for now. I'm just using it as a place to hold so I can get my corner nice and tight. All right, so I line that up. All of my decorative edges seem to line up just fine. Take your sharp pencil, like I said, and then trace this line right here, and trace this same line right here. Okay, so now I have cuts for both of these boards, okay, even though I know it goes that direction. So again, there's my line, and I have my original right there, so I know what I'm doing, and that one goes that way. Take both of these boards back to the table saw and cut them in the right direction, and we'll check the fit. This is the biggest reason that I like using this jig as opposed to the chop saw, is because I can see this line when I'm ready to cut. All I have to do is stick the board out until that line appears right there, just barely inside. Because this is a zero clearance to the blade, as long as I can just barely see that line and then cut there, that's where the cut needs to be. This is very accurate. So that's my cut, and that's the reason that I prefer this over the chop saw, because I can't see that line from where I'm cutting. Good. There's my line, and I want it just inside the edge, so it's just inside of that. And remember, on every cut, these decorative edges are towards this fence. Back at the chessboard, let's see how they fit. Now keep in mind, they're not necessarily the same length. Because we did have to cut a little bit off at the very end, it's going to be slightly narrower one direction than the other. So I think I've got them backwards. That's fine. Let's see. This way works a little bit better. Line that back up. Okay, that looks pretty good, and that looks pretty good. This one might be a hair too long, and the way I can tell that is there's a little bit of a flat spot. This edge is sticking out just a little bit further than I like. So if that happens, just go and trim it again on the saw, just a hair, and then come back. But this one looks perfect. So now I take this board and I bump it into that one. That looks fine. Take my sharp pencil, draw this line, make the same cut, leave, come back, and do it again. And you're going to repeat that on this last remaining piece. Now, once you get all the pieces cut, put them together and look for gaps. Are there any gaps? Okay, this one looks pretty good down here. However, this one has a gap. I mentioned before, I felt like this one was a little bit too long, so I'm just going to take it to the saw and trim off barely a 1/16 of an inch, probably even a little less, until that gap closes. So to cut off just a hair, we're going to do it like we did on the sled in the back. Bring it up so it just touches. There it is. Bring it back and cut. And that cuts off just a hair a little bit. Try it and see. Come back if you need to. Finally, I just came back, and guys, I've made this type of project numerous times. And I've been back and forth from the table saw 6 or 8 times just to fine tune. So understand that this part, while not terribly hard, is very intricate, very precise. We want our gaps to be closed. We want all the corners to line up right. Now, to help make sure everything lines up correctly, when we put it together, we're going to use biscuits. So what I want you to do is draw some lines. We're going to draw lines, say the second square in about in the middle. So a line here in the center, and on the walnut one here, again, about 1.5 squares in. This doesn't have to be super accurate, but we just need that line on there to help us out. And now we're going to use biscuits, and I'll show you how to use it to get everything lined up so it doesn't shift when we glue it. In addition to the lines, I'm going to mark 1, 1, 2, 2, and so forth so I know which pieces are gonna go where. 4, 4. So I can always line them back up. I don't want to mistake this piece for that one because they could be slightly different. I don't want that to happen. After everything is marked and you're ready to go, come and ask for a biscuit joiner. This is a biscuit joiner, not a jointer, but a joiner. We're going to join the pieces together with biscuits, which basically are little football-shaped, thin pieces of wood. So they go into a slot that we're going to make with this contraption here. First of all, you're going to want this piece and the sawdust catcher, the bag. So this little piece has a little nub on the top and it just fits right in and you hear it click in, and then you just attach this to the vent there. So this will catch all the sawdust as it's coming out the back. Go ahead and plug it in, and I'll move the board aside for just a moment. We'll do that second. Then I can have all my pieces. So what we have to do is, this piece being nice and flat, I'm going to set this down on it and line up the line that I drew here with the tiny little notch in the front. And you can see it while standing up and looking down on top of it. I need to hold them together, and you can kind of use your thumb to press them together. And when I turn it on, I'm going to squeeze, and what that does is a blade will come out. Okay, you can see how that turns right there. Safety glasses on, just put it right against that board. Hold the trigger and push in and pull out. In and out. And now I have a nice biscuit slot right there. And we're going to put a mating slot into the board later on. Do that on all of your pieces, everywhere you put a line. Take your time, there's no reason to go super fast. Be careful to always clean the sawdust out. You don't want either of them on top of sawdust. You want them both to be flush to this board. Hold it down and make sure, because it's spinning, the board's going to want to move a little. So just hold on tight to it and then in and out. Now you're going to do exactly the same thing to the board. Just line it up with your lines and do the same cut.